This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com, HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know. Two women that were old friends and lived not too far apart from one another. Both had husbands that had serious problems. One had a husband who was very sick, and even though the doctors came, they said there was nothing that they could do for him, and that the only thing that could heal him would be a miracle. And the other was the wife of an innkeeper who had a tavern, and unfortunately, the entire year had passed, and he had not been able to save up all of the money to pay the rent to the landlord. Now these two women and their husbands had different levels of faith in tzaddikim and in the holy Rebbes. One woman, the one who was married to the man who was sick in bed, she didn't believe in tzaddikim at all, but her husband did. He was a great believer in the power of tzaddikim. And the woman who was married to the innkeeper, she had great faith in the tzaddikim, but her husband did not. And so the man who was sick, and the doctors had told him only a miracle could heal him, turned to his wife and said, "Please, you have to go to my Rebbe, the holy Rizhiner Rebbe, Rebbe Yisrael of Rizhin. The doctor said only a miracle could heal me, so for sure, a bracha from the Rebbe, that's all I need. And if I had the strength, I would do it on my own, but I can't even get out of bed. Please, you have to go for me." And so the wife, who didn't believe in tzaddikim and didn't believe in Rebbes, but did love her husband and wanted him to get better, she hired a carriage and went on her way to the Rizhiner Rebbe. And on the way, she happened to pass through the town where her old friend lived, the wife of the innkeeper. And she decided to give a little visit to her friend on the way. And the friend said, "You won't believe this, but I am going to the Rizhiner Rebbe for my husband, because we don't have any money to pay the landlord for the annual rent. And not only that, the nobleman who owns this tavern and this inn has been threatening to kick us out and then to throw us in prison until our debt is paid. I tried to tell my husband we should go to the tzaddik, the Rizhiner Rebbe, and get a bracha, but my husband doesn't believe in tzaddikim, doesn't believe in the Rebbe. So she said, so I'm going. Can I join you in your carriage?" The friend said, "Sure, let's go." So the two women made their way together to the Rizhiner Rebbe, the one who believed in tzaddikim and the one who didn't. And when they reached Rizhin, they got to the Rebbe's secretary, and as was the custom in the Rebbe's court, the secretary asked each of them what they came for, and he wrote a kvittel, a note, with the name of the person and their mother's name and what they wanted from the Rebbe. Now somehow, since the two of them were there together, the secretary wrote the note at the same time. He mixed them up, and he gave the note from the wife of the sick man to the wife of the innkeeper, and the note from the innkeeper to the wife of the sick man. And so when they went before the great tzaddik, the Rizhiner Rebbe, the woman whose husband was sick gave the Rebbe a note asking for advice on how to deal with financial problems. And she received the answer, "May HaKadosh Baruch Hu send you salvation, and Be'ezrat Hashem, everything will work out." And the wife was quite happy with the advice from the Rebbe. She figured, okay, the Rebbe said, may you have salvation. May you have a refuah shlema. That's how she understood it, that you should have a full recovery. And since the doctor said the only thing that would save him was a miracle, well, that was probably going to be a miracle. And she's the one who had no faith in the tzaddik. But for her, that was good enough. And the woman whose husband didn't have the money to pay the rent, so she gave over the Rebbe a note asking for a refuah shlema for her husband. But she didn't realize that she gave over this note. And the Rebbe said to her, "You need to do benkis," which was putting leeches and heated glass cups on the body in order to pull out blood, which is how people used to heal themselves back then. The woman was a little surprised by the answer because her husband was completely healthy. He wasn't sick at all. He had money problems. He didn't have health problems. But she had total faith in the tzaddik and in the Rebbe. And she didn't consider that there could be a possible mix-up. If the Rebbe said to use leeches and glass cups, then that was what was going to save her husband. And so when she came home, her husband asked, what did the Rebbe say? She said, the Rebbe gave you a special segula, a special way of bringing something good about in the world. He said you should put leeches in cups. The husband, who didn't believe in tzaddikim, he said, what, is this crazy? Are you crazy? That's what the Rebbe said? She said, look, that's what the Rebbe said. I'm not lying to you. He thought, forget it. I thought there was no reason to believe in tzaddikim, and now I know why. The wife said, no, you should give it a try. What do you have to lose? But he wasn't interested at all. A few days later, there was a message from the landlord that he had to pay the rent. And since he didn't have any money at all, he decided maybe he better do what the Rebbe said. And so he had his wife get leeches and put hot glass cups on different parts of his body. At that moment, when he was laying there really suffering, saying, this is so painful. I can't take this. One of the guards from the landlord came into the house, and he stood at attention, and he clicked his heels, and he said, if you don't pay the rent by the end of the day, your family will be kicked out of the house, and you will be thrown in the dungeon. But the innkeeper was in such pain. He was just laying on his bed, and the guard didn't understand what was going on, and he saw that the innkeeper wasn't answering him. He said, did you hear what I said? And the innkeeper was saying, And the guard, he sees the innkeeper is in bed, and it looks like, chas v'shalom, he might die. So he went back to the nobleman, and he said, you won't believe this. The innkeeper looks like he's about to die. And the nobleman said, what are you talking about? I just saw him the other day, and he was in perfect health. He said, bring him to me. And the guard said, he might not make it. If we try to bring him over here, he might not make it. So the nobleman said, fine, carry him in his bed. I want to see him. And so a few of the guards went, and they picked up the innkeeper, and they brought him in his bed to the nobleman, and they placed him outside the front door of the mansion. The guards went off to do their normal tasks of guarding, and they left the innkeeper laying on his bed outside the front door of the mansion. Just then, the nobleman's wife comes out of the house. She sees the innkeeper laying on a bed, covered in leeches, bleeding, looking horrible, and he's crying from pain. And the nobleman's wife says to him, my poor man, what happened to you? And at that moment, he had an idea. He said, I was under so much pressure to pay off my debt to your husband. Yesterday, I went into town and tried to borrow the money, and it was really hard, and I could get a little bit from this one and a little bit from that one. I couldn't get the full amount of money. It took all day, and by the time I had finished, it was late at night, and there was no way for me to hire a wagon to get back home, so I had no choice. I had to walk home in the dark, and a group of robbers came, and they stole all my money, and they beat me up, and now I don't have any money to pay your husband, and I owe him, and I owe all the people that I borrowed money from. But, Baruch Hashem, I'm still alive. In pain, but I'm alive. And the nobleman's wife, she was shocked. A few minutes later, the nobleman showed up in order to talk with the innkeeper. And the wife is there, and she sees her husband, and she says to him, what did you do to this poor man? Look at him, he's lying on his bed. It looks like he's about to die. And this is because of you. You put so much pressure on him to pay the rent. Forgive all of his debt immediately. And the landlord, he's like, what? I'm not going to forgive his debt. The wife said, if you don't forgive his debt, you and I are going to have real problems. So he said, fine. He didn't need the money anyhow. He said, fine, for you, my wife, that I love so much, I'll forgive the innkeeper's debt. The wife, though, she wasn't happy. She was looking at the innkeeper. He looked terrible. She said to her husband, we have to pay for his doctor bills. He said, okay, we'll pay for the doctor bills. She said, that's not enough. Look at what he had to go through in order to borrow money, in order to pay off his debt to you. And now he's got to pay off all that debt. I want you to give him the tavern and the inn rent-free for 3 years. The nobleman said, all right, I'll do that as well. And then he was sick of seeing the innkeeper. He called the guards, said, take this Jew out of my face. I don't want to see him anymore. And they carried the innkeeper away. When the innkeeper came back home, the wife took off the leeches and the cups. And she said to him, you see, I told you the Rebbe is a true tzaddik. I told you that he would help us. You thought I was crazy. But look, and the husband had to admit, even though it was a very strange way of being helped, He had no idea how he was going to pay off the debt before. Now what happened to the Jew who had great faith in the tzaddik and who was sick? Well, of course, he had a refuah shlema. He had a full recovery, and he was able to continue serving Hashem b'simcha. Many years later, when the story came out, the Rizhiner Rebbe told his relative by marriage, the Karliner Rebbe, about this story. And he said when he received the kvittel about the innkeeper's debts, he knew that the kvittels had been mixed up. But since he didn't see, with his holy vision, any way of helping the innkeeper, he figured it was a sign from Hashem that he had to give him the advice that he would give to a sick person. And the Rizhiner Rebbe said, the only reason that the innkeeper's debts were forgiven was because of the great faith that his wife had in the Rebbes and in tzaddikim.
La